Hello and welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm going to be doing my 14.9 support tier list. So if you have content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There weren't a huge amount of changes towards the support role this patch. We saw a couple of some of the stronger things get nerfed down, of course, the likes of Janna, Blitzcrank were overperforming a bit. Pyke tended to be a bit stronger in elite play, which is why he has been nerfed down. On top of this, we have seen buffs towards Karma and Seraphine, as these two champs were underperforming, and then Twitch indirectly got hit because of ADC Twitch overperforming, which has put him even more solidified in the D tier. So let's cover the changes. To begin with, MF is going to stay within the D tier. She has been underperforming the support role for a while. Her play rate drops every patch, but it still has enough that merits putting her in the tier list, but I'd recommend avoiding this champion. That, alongside Ashe and Twitch, make up the kind of marksman of the D tier. Ashe, very much elite and pro skewed. You don't tend to want to pair this thing with things like other than the Kalista in certain circumstances, or the Varus, but on top of this, it tends to massively underperform in mid and low elo. Of course, mid elo is where I target my tier list, and it's just not something I'd really recommend. In Twitch's case, I haven't even got him on here. His play rate's basically completely gone from the support role, but once again, it got nerfed. It's been underperforming for a while. The itemization isn't as strong this season, and he's received nerfs towards AP over the course of like the last patches, or last patch, and then like a couple patches before that. And yeah, it's put him in a pretty bad spot. He's not really recommendable as a support. And yeah, that makes up the marksman. Moving on to the other two things, we've got Malphite. Of course, he tends to be very gimmicky. You pair him with a Yasuo, and of course that is the whole premise behind the lane. You can't really do him with working with anything else, and it's obviously gimmicky with the Yasuo. So definitely avoid this champion unless you're just kind of having fun, I guess. But yeah, for solo queue, wouldn't recommend it. Alongside him, Hui is also joining the D tier. He'd been underperforming the support tier list in the support role for a while. I've brought him down from the C tier into the D tier. Of course, if you can pilot the champion well, he can have merits. Of course, there's loads of different CC options on his E, but he requires a decent amount of gold to be useful within the game. You can't really function with him as a support. He does also kind of want levels as well, which is why he tends to operate better within the mid lane, but he is still a decent APC. Of course, you can like flex him into that role. I just wouldn't really recommend him as a support. Moving on to the C tier, we have a couple of champions here. So Veigar is going to lead the C tier. There is a bit more merit to the fact that Cage is a very valuable tool. Veigar being relatively strong at the moment also benefits his position within the support role. Still something I wouldn't really recommend. Of course, you tend to pair him with the likes of Zig, so you get the W into Cage combo, but past that, not really a huge amount of merit to this champion. You can build Shurelios on him. He can function quite well with this item, but a lot of his power is locked behind level scaling, which is why he tends to operate better within the mid lane. Yuumi, also down here. Not a huge fan of Yuumi. I haven't been for a while, ever since they did the change to like benefit the best friend bonus, rather than just being a generalistic support. I think the champion's been a lot worse off for it. Of course, it's been healthier for competitive. It's no longer as like universally good. But it's really hurt the champion and what it really can function as. Of course, I think the whole attach idea is just pretty bad on a kit like Yuumi's. She's very hard bound to marksman. Of course, if your ADC doesn't perform, she's not going to do very well within the game, and it just makes her really hard to recommend as a champion. Of course, if you do get advantages and you pair her with the likes of Tristan, that is actually a relatively strong pairing. Of course, Zeri tends to be the more traditional one. You can pair her with the likes of Yasuo and Nyla, and she tends to have some relatively strong like functionalities with them. But for the most part, I'd recommend avoiding this champion. Learn other things which are more generalistically good, and you should find a bit more success. Karma did get buff this patch, but still underperforming, still stays within the C tier. The champion needs a bit more love to really like push her up within the support role. She can operate quite nicely as a relatively early aggressive AP champion, but her power late mid game just isn't really there yet. Makes her hard to recommend. There are better options which kind of fill similar niches to Karma, but have more strength later on into the game. And then Pantheon is going to join them in the C tier. So Pantheon had been hanging on for a while in the B tier. He was a relatively strong aggressive AD support. A bit more simple to play than the likes of Pike, so you can kind of pilot the champion a bit better. But the nerfs towards some of his core items this patch have definitely hurt him. Of course, Eclipse, Sundered Sky, Sterix all got nerfs. These are 3 of his core options, and it's dropped him down to the C tier. I once again wouldn't really recommend this champion. He kind of needs a bit too much to really have value, and unless you're able to be very aggressive and like you can play the lane correctly, you tend to lose a lot of value, and there tends to be better support options. And that wraps up the C tier. Moving on to the B tier, of course, Teemo tends to be very low elo skewed. Like, I would not recommend Teemo if you're looking to climb into like the higher ranks, but like as a low to mid transition, and like he's okay within mid elo, Teemo is a fine option. He does have a very strong set of scaling is very key on him. The likes of Malignance, Leandry, Riley can be solid options on him. He works quite nicely with Zaxax, and yeah, he probably sits towards the bottom of the B tier. Not great higher up, but within mid elo, he's viable as an option. Morgana is also going to be within the B tier. You tend to see this champion primarily paired with the likes of Caitlyn or other things which can follow up quite nicely on her CC. As a standalone champion, I wouldn't really recommend her. The Black Shield value tends to be pretty bait in most circumstances, as your ADC should be running cleanse a lot of the time. But for the most part, there are some merits to this pick. She can dish out a decent amount of damage if you're ahead of the curve. Q can be a very valuable lockdown tool, but you're a bit more synergistic reliant, and there are better options. I would recommend Lux a bit more within spaces like Morgana. Tahm Kench, very pro-bound champion. Within the support role, he tends to be a bit better these days. Of course, Heart still does give him a bit more power here, but you're really only pairing him with the likes of Senna within solo queue. You can struggle to find a huge amount of value if your ADC isn't like fully aware of how the functionality of Tahm Kench is. It makes him hard to recommend. He kind of sits towards the bottom of the B tier. Swain, also not really a big fan of this champion as a support option. He's pretty gold reliant. Like, you want your core items of the Riley, the Malignance, the Leandry to really be strong within the game. Of course, if you're able to stay ahead of the curve, he does have a lot of value, and you can kind of win games through support Swain. But for the most part, I'd recommend him in other roles. Mid lane tends to be his best performing, but APC Swain is still definitely an option. Camille, also going to be the B tier, tends to be a bit weaker than top lane Camille these days. Of course, she did get nerfed for the support role. They took the E base damage down by 20. Of course, Bloodsong also being nerfed did hurt support Camille as well. Tends to be a bit harder to pilot. Her items have been nerfed. It's just kind of dragging her back down. She kind of sits towards the bottom of the B tier as well now. Tends to be a bit more elite skewed as well. But like, if you want to play Camille, she's a great top laner and tends to operate pretty well within the mid lane. Like, you can function within that role. You tend to be a bit more PTA reliant and like more operate, like you tend to operate a bit more on your burst potential rather than like trading patterns which you tend to use within the top lane with the likes of Grass, utilizing your passive and yeah, like harass with W, stuff like that. But yeah, Camille, great champion in top. Can be an option in mid. Wouldn't really recommend her as much in support anymore. Alistar, also going to be in the beta. He's a fine option if you want something with good disengage and strong pairings with the likes of Tristana, Samira within that space. Then Alistar can fit the bill, but he tends to be a bit more bound by these pairings. He doesn't have as much value as some of the other support options at the moment, but he's still a fine option. Nautilus is still the biggest bait pick at the moment. I would really recommend avoiding Nautilus. Like, he can operate in a decent amount of games, and of course the value of the point and click does kind of it shows us a lot of strength when it can be kind of deceptive. There are lots of other values other champions have which aren't as like noticeable as Nautilus. Of course, if you're able to pilot the champion well and you're like getting good roams, you're getting value out of your hook, your E base damage can be quite oppressive. And yeah, there's still definitely strength to this pick. And within obviously high elo pro play, he is definitely considered like an S plus pick. Within mid low, I would recommend avoiding Nautilus. He tends to be a pretty big bait pick here and a good way to lose a decent amount of LP. If you find yourself dying on Nautilus a lot, you do tend to just chain death, chain in. Yeah, there might be time to move on to a different pick to gain a bit more LP. Galio's going to be in the beta. He's still a great defensive option. Of course, he's been buffed a couple of times now, and it's definitely helped him within the support role. He just doesn't tend to be as strong as some of the other options. He really valued the likes of Even Shroud when it was in the game. doesn't have quite that same fallback pattern without Even Child, and like the itemization just isn't quite there. Kind of like solidifies him as like a middle of the pack B tier champion. And then Shen and Fresh are going to be two of the other champions within the B tier. Actually, we're going to be 3 champions here. So in Shen's case, he's been rising in popularity as like a jungler and a support. He kind of sits within the B tier here. Of course, the value of Locket is very strong on him. He has very good support traits, but it can be quite hard to play this champion, of course, when you fall behind. He's a bit more defensive. He doesn't quite have the level of offensive outputs later on. Early on, you can of course show aggression. If you're running the likes of Aftershock Guardian, Halo Blades, PTA, there are options there. It kind of depends what your rune set you want to run in the game. I just wouldn't recommend him as like a higher than B tier support. Yeah, kind of like around that space. In Fresh and Pike's case, Fresh actually has been gaining a lot of popularity. I'm pretty sure he's the second most popular support in the game now. There are lots of merits to this champ. Of course, the Q, the E damage, the value of the Flay, the shield, and like the lantern being able to drag people from poor like positions. But it's a bit more elite skewed. If you're not consistently playing a lot of Fresh, it can be quite a bait to play this champion. Of course, if you put the time in, you get the value out of the hook, and like you're chain comboing pretty well. You're utilizing the lantern, making sure you're skilling the right thing in the right games. Like, don't be afraid to max E within games if you're not consistently landing Qs. Like, it's hard to like land Qs within certain games. There can be value in that. Even Lantern Max as like a second option can be something you opt into if you're really just not getting a huge amount of points within Q. It kind of depends on the situation, but Fresh is a very solid B tier option, pretty close to the A tier these days. In Pike's case, he's been dragged down from the A tier. The nerfs towards his W cooldown, combined with the lethality scaling, I believe, has brought him down towards the B tier. He's still a solid option, especially if you're looking for something a bit more aggressive, who can carry and snowball games. But if you fall behind this pick, he is borderline unplayable. Like, you are really going to struggle to get value out of him, and you do need to close out games relatively quickly. Like, you do not scale very well on this pick, and it kind of solidifies him as a B tier champion. Of course, the longer games in mid and low elo tend to be to Pike's disadvantage, so he kind of sits here. Moving on to the A tier, we still have Senna. Senna is still a very solid AD option, one of the better AD options still. There aren't a huge amount of AD marksman picks within the support, which are kind of like promoted by Riot. Of course, Ashe, MF have been nerfed down to the point where they're really just not that viable anymore. But in Senna's case, still a solid A tier option, has a lot of great pairings. The build tends to be a bit weaker with the Yomu's nerf coming in. You tend to be more bound towards the likes of Opportunity and Warglaive, but you can find a lot of success. Make sure you're getting the right pairings. Be careful of hook champions. You have to ban the likes of Fresh or Nautilus. If you play into these picks, it can be very punishing if you're not able to consistently dodge them. But yeah, still a very solid A tier pick. Nico tends to be pretty nice with pairings like Kalista, where you can get lots of value out of her ultimate. Of course, if you're piloting the pick well, getting good ult flank angles, being able to utilize your E-snap and like the long duration of it through minions, stuff like that. There's lots of value to this pick. It can be very oppressive to play against early on to the game. The key combined with the likes of Scorch and Airy, Comet, kind of like different rune choices. Yeah, it can be pretty oppressive to play against. Does a good amount of damage. Solid A tier option. Lux, also a relatively good A tier option at the moment. The buffs she's received this season to her Q and her passive have definitely put her towards the middle of the A tier. Solidifies her as being a strong AP support carry when you can get the items. Of course, if you're not able to snowball throughout the game, it can be quite punishing to play this pick. You can go from feeling like you one-shot people to not really even chunking people out. So yeah, there's a bit of a gap between like actually snowballing, playing this pick successfully, and not really finding success. If you're not able to consistently land your skill shots on Lux, I would recommend avoiding this champion. You're kind of bound to that. Same goes for Xerath. Xerath's still relatively strong in the fact that he has a lot of range. It can be quite oppressive to play against Xerath, especially if he's ahead. He did lose win rate, obviously, with the scripting changes, but that doesn't really affect the placement. He's still like a low A tier option. The itemization is just a bit worse this season for him, and yeah, it kind of drags him down a bit. Zilean, also an A tier option. Zilean needs some sort of update. The pick's a bit outdated, but still definitely merits to the fact that you give XP and like for scaling marksmen, which like are a bit more bound to like their levels, it can be quite powerful in that space. Of course, the ultimate is still an incredibly valuable tool. The bombs do a huge amount of damage, like 300 base damage, I believe the Q does. Once you have all the points in it at level 9, very strong ability, but you do have to be able to consistently hit it. If the target's fast moving, it can be quite punishing. And yeah, there's lots of things within the space, but he doesn't tend to be as strong as he has been in the past. Recommend just going the Airy or the kind of like Guardian non-tank variation. The tank build with the Grasp and the Slay and the Warmogs has kind of fallen off at this point, and I wouldn't really recommend it. Renata, still a great option. Like, I really like Renata as a support, but she is a bit more ADC bound and a bit more counter pick reliant. Like, you have to be able to play Renata into good comps, and you kind of have to pair her with champions which can benefit from her W, combined with like the value of the ultimate and can like punish off of it. Yeah, that's kind of the premise with Renata. She pairs really nicely with Callista, and make sure you do Drakes with this champion. She is great Drake taking, as her passive does 1% of maximum health with no cap towards monsters, which is a very powerful tool to have. Lulu is also within the A tier, still a great enchanter option. Of course, did get buffed towards the beginning of the season. She got a bit more shielding on her E, which has definitely put her in a better spot. A very solid A tier option. Maokai got nerfed a huge amount so far this season. He's still a very solid option, very easy to play, does scale pretty well as like a support pick. The ult has so much power as like a solid root option. The E saplings provide so much vision and can make it very hard to punish Maokai's within laning phase. That combined with the Slay, which is like the primary reason why this pick was elevated for so long. He's still a solid A tier option, but he has been nerfed a lot at this point, which doesn't make him as reliable as it once did. But great option when you're looking to pair him with the likes of Jhin. You do want to put the games in if you're trolling your teammates with ult, like with bad ults, and you're not able to consistently like get good value out of it, whether that's blocking Rift, setting up good positions for your teammates to kind of like play into the enemy comp. Then it can be quite punishing to play this pick. Of course, he does a huge amount of damage. Like, his base damage is very high, combined with the Q damage. There's lots of oppressive tools on this pick. Heal now having 2 shrines instead of just the 1. Wait, 2 charges instead of just the 1. I worded it correctly. Worded it incorrectly. There's still a lot of parts of this pick. You tend to be a bit more bound to like your tank builds these days, but he can still kind of like dabble with like Dark Seal and stuff like that, if you are very much snowballing within the game. Shaco, an incredibly obnoxious pick. He's a bit more gimmicky, but his traps have so much value. If you're playing into a lot of melee champions which can't actively break your traps without activating them, there is so much value to this pick. He has so much Drake control and like objective control. It can be very oppressive to play against him. If you're playing into 4 melees as Shaco, I would really recommend, if you're playing against 4 melees, I would really recommend considering locking in Shaco if you're like a latter pick within the within Champ Select. Definitely lots of value there. Zac is not on here, but Zac is a very solid support option. Of course, it has been nerfed now that Zac's sustain has gone down. It's a bit more unpopular than it used to be, but he still definitely has a lot of strengths here. The high base damage of his kit combined with some of the like pairings he has just gives him a lot of value. You can opt into things like Dark Seal if you're snowballing. He spikes quite nicely off Slay. And yeah, still a very solid A tier option. Rel, of course, no longer a jungler, but still a very solid support option. Once again, you want to pair her with the likes of Samira or solid engage picks, where you're able to get a lot of value out of her W combined with her ultimate. She has good roaming, good skirmishing potential in River. Yeah, there's just lots of value towards this pick. Makes her a very solid A tier option. Skarner has been removed. His popularity has decreased to the point where it's not really like there's no real data for him. He has been, of course, nerfed this patch, which is like why he is losing more popularity than like just natural decay. And yeah, he was like an A tier option. I imagine the nerfs would have dropped him towards B, and I'm pretty sure he's getting nerfed again, and that would maybe drop him like out completely. But yeah, no more Skarner, but he can still function, I imagine. Like, yeah, it's probably a bit more gimmicky at this point, but yeah, there's definitely merit to it. Rakan is still a very solid support pick. He still works really nicely with Zeke's. It is a very valuable item on him. He has really nice pairings with the likes of Xayah. You can, of course, pair him with other things than Xayah. Twitch used to be a pretty good pairing with Rakan. don't know if it is as much these days, but still can work quite nicely in that one. And yeah, he pairs quite nicely with a lot of things. He has lots of very valuable engage tools. His Q is now actually an ability. It has been for a while, but yeah, very solid tool. Great A tier option. And then Soraka wraps up the A tier. Soraka is in a very, actually no, I'm going to drop two champions down from the A tier. So Soraka, great enchanter, does a huge amount of healing, but ult is a very valuable tool. Anti-heal is not as obtainable as it once was. You tend to be punished mostly by AP champions, which can pick up Oblivion Orb, the likes of like Zyra or Brand, who can like mass AoE apply it. But if the enemy team doesn't have a champion like that, it can be quite hard to pick up anti-heal, and it can make Soraka a very valuable pick. In Blitz's case, he's been nerfed this patch. He now drops down from the S tier to the A tier. He's a little less reliable. The W movement speed's gone down, combined with the passive shield not having as long uptime. He was towards the bottom of the S tier, now drops down to the A tier. And then Vel'Koz, I'm also going to drop down to the A tier. He was kind of like the at the back end of the S tier, but yeah, he deserves to be dropped down. He just wasn't finding the same level of results as a lot of the S tier options. And then Seraphine actually goes from the B tier up to the A tier. The Q AP ratio did enough to kind of push her up. She's now not a troll support. She wasn't previously, but like she wasn't something I could really recommend. But the AP ratio going up actually makes her something which isn't as it's more valuable to have this champion on your team now. It doesn't feel as much as like a burden. The E and R, of course, are relatively supportive CC tools. The W is an incredibly powerful AoE tool. Just the value of the shield, the heal, the team-wide like nature of it, very strong. But the damage wasn't quite there. Of course, for the QAP ratio going up, and the income of gold she can get, combined with the like items of like Rhylize or Archangels if you're gonna root, or Staff of Flowing Water, yeah, just allows her to do a bit more damage. Definitely promotes her as like an A tier option, and yeah, very solid pick. Definitely something which is a solid pick. Moving on to the S tier, so we have a couple here. Nami got buffed a couple patches ago. The E damage went down, but she received a lot of love on the W, and it's massively helped her. The pairing with Lucian is even better now. But generalistically, she just functions with a lot of marksmen. Jhin, Brand, Brand not being a marksman, but Brand is like an option, is still very good in this space. She pairs really nicely with AP champions and just like auto champions, which can like utilize full value of the E, the slow on the ability, and the damage on the ability. And yeah, it solidifies her as a very solid S tier option. We've also got Taric. Taric tends to be a bit more niche, but he is very good at what he does, being an anti-engage pick with his E and his R. The healing on the Q, the W giving it some armor. There's just a lot of merit to this pick when you're playing him in the right spot. He's not any higher because of you are a bit more reliant on like using him as like a counter pick option. But yeah, a very solid S tier pick. In Leona's case, tends to be countered obviously by Merc Treads. That is like the whole thing. Like tenacity is very strong against Leona, but she has been buffed a couple of times now at this point, and it's put her in a strong enough spot, but she is a very solid S tier pick. She's relatively simplistic to play. She's a pretty cookie cutter engaged champion, and yeah, it's just lots of value to that. Braum, great anti-engage option, tends to be a bit weaker into enchanters. Really values when champions can proc his Q quite quickly. Of course, the E is a very strong ability. W giving resist to your marksman can make them a bit more durable. The ult is an incredible tool as well. And yeah, there's also value to Braum. Very solid S tier option. Brand and Zyra are still the AP burn champion, or the AP carry burn champions, which I'd really recommend in the support role. If you're looking to climb out of low and mid elo, these two picks will do wonders for you. In Brand's case, he is a bit more carry potential than Zyra, does a bit more damage, but Zyra has great zone control, something which is definitely a very strong merit of this pick. And yeah, both of them are very viable, strong S tier options. And then we have 4 champions left. So Milio is going to be the top of the S tier. He's like middle of S tier. He's a very solid enchanter option, relatively simplistic to play, has great pairings, can really enable the likes of Lucian, Jinx, Aphelios. Of course, you don't tend to see as many Aphelioses in mid and low elo, but still very strong with those pairings. And yeah, very solid option. And then moving on to the S plus tier, so Janna, Sona, and Poppy are going to wrap up the S plus tier. Jana got nerfed this patch, but she is still a very solid option. They compensated it by nerfing the W, buffing the E, making her more reliant on her shield, but having more shield value, like maintaining the uptime on the AD buff on that. Still a very nice thing to have. The W damage going down is definitely more of an elite skewed thing. Does hurt her a bit when you are going like the Zaxax route, but if you're going Dream Maker, you're going like for E power. Still lots of merit to that, and still a very solid S plus option. She still has a really good kit. In Sona's case, games go on longer here. If you can get full value out of Sona's passive combined with like Archangels and Moonstone online, Sona's a very strong champion. It's very hard to break a Sona once she has 2 items combined with the likes of Bloodsong or Dreammaker. And yeah, there's lots of power to this pick. She has really strong pairings. If you can pair her with something which utilizes her Q, and then you're like min-maxing your stacks, like getting full rotations on of Ws on like camps when you are like helping your jungler, getting the shield proc, getting the heal proc, getting Q procs on champions. Yeah, there's lots of merit to this pick, and she's in a really good spot at the moment. And then Poppy, I spoke about Poppy last time, as a pick which is really rising at the moment into a huge amount of mobility in the game. She is a free roll flex, of course. We are now seeing her at MSI, which is good, like as this kind of really powerful pick. And yeah, there's just lots of merit to this champion. If you're able to utilize her as a counter pick, there's lots of strengths here. A lot of the S plus options are actually really strong counter picks, not as blindable, but some of the more blindable options are the likes of you can blind like the AP like you can blind Zyra Brand and tend to have a lot of success. Of course, you are more likely to be punished by the hook champions, but which are relatively popular. But if you ban them out, then you can still find a lot of success there. And then yeah, that's kind of like the main premise here. But yeah, those are my thoughts. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.